Good morning, my brothers. Today is January 5th. And so we turn to the book of Proverbs, chapter 5, for God's daily dose of wisdom. And as I was reading through Proverbs chapter 5, verses 7 through 10, jumped off the page, and they go like this. Now then, my sons, listen to me, and do not depart from the words of my mouth. Keep your way far from her. Who's her? Is the adulteress. Chapters 5, 6, and 7 are all about the adulteress. Keep your way far from her, and do not go near the door of her house, or you will give your vigor to others, and your years to the cruel one. And strangers will be filled with your strength, and your hard-earned goods will go to the house of an alien. Well, Proverbs chapters 5, 6, and 7 are all about the adulterous woman, the wayward woman. And it's interesting that Solomon dedicates so much time and energy to warning his sons about the adulterous woman. And we can see why here, because the consequences of going to this adulterous woman, of having this affair, the idea here is that you're falling into sexual sin, sexual temptation, and the consequences are devastating. Now, if you think that it's an excessive amount of the Bible to talk about or to address this whole idea of sexual sin, then consider this. Solomon was the wisest man that ever lived. Samson was one of the strongest men that ever lived. And David was a man after God's own heart, so he was considered to be one of the godliest men that ever lived. So if you think that you're not going to fall into sexual temptation or sexual sin, you'd have to be wiser than the wisest man, stronger than the strongest man, and more godly than the godliest man. And that just ain't going to happen. And when he says that you will give your vigor to others, that word vigor, actually, if you dig down into it, it talks about the decision-making power that we possess. In other words, you're going to give your ability to make decisions about your life to others. Your years to the cruel one means that it's going to take a long time to dig yourself out of this hole. As strangers will be filled with your strength, and your hard-earned goods will go to the house of an alien. That's talking about the financial ruin and devastation that happens as a result of falling into sexual sin. So we can see that it's devastating, that if we do that, we succumb to that temptation, it's absolutely devastating. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is found in Psalms 119, verse 9, where we read, "How can a young man keep his way pure? By keeping it according to your word." Now, when he says the word, he's talking about the written instruction of God, the Torah. And the Torah was given to the nation of Israel as a way of living your life in such a way that would bring you prosperity. It would keep you from heartache and troubles, and it would bless you in ways that you wouldn't be blessed if you weren't a member of the nation of Israel. And that's one of the reasons why the Jews have been so persecuted over the years, is because as they kept their way according to his word, they have experienced this blessing, and there's been a lot of jealousy on the part of the Gentiles and the non-Jewish world looking at the Jewish blessing that has occurred as a result of their following or keeping the word of God. And that jealousy has resulted in that persecution. Now, there is a demonic component to that persecution. I will acknowledge that. But the Bible tells us that the word of God, the Old Testament, the Torah, was given to the nation of Israel as a tutor to point them to Christ. So as a Christian church, it is incumbent upon us then to look to Christ to determine how we should live our lives. Yes, we should acknowledge and we should honor the old ways of living in the Torah, but we should primarily look to Christ to determine how we should live our lives. That's how we are going to prevent us from succumbing to that sexual temptation. And one of the ways that we can do that is found in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 14 and 15. And it goes like this: "For the love of Christ controls us, having concluded this, that one died for all, therefore all died. And he died for all, so that they who live might no longer live for themselves, but for him who died and rose again on their behalf." That's the key. That's how we keep from succumbing to sexual temptation, by recognizing that we are no longer alive in and of ourselves. Paul writes, "I've been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ in me." Recognizing that fact and not living for ourselves any longer, as we read in 2 Corinthians, but living for him, Christ, who died and rose again on our behalf. That's the key. The instruction of the Old Testament points us to Christ. We live our lives according to his word, written both in the Old and the New Testament, but more importantly, the love of Christ controls us. Are we loving that other individual by falling into sexual temptation, by falling into sexual sin? Are we loving God and loving ourselves properly by doing that? If we keep that in the forefront of our minds, it can keep us far from the door of the adulterous woman. My brothers, I love you, each and every one of you. And I pray that you go out today and you make a difference in someone's life. God bless you.